Okay,
Hi.
Alan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And can everybody hear Alan okay? Can you say something one more time?
Itty bitty baby, itty bitty boat, itty bitty baby boat.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our approximately millionth uh, meeting of the Get Lit Book Club. They keep changing the controls on this thing. I'm sorry. Uh, there we go. That's what I wanted to do. Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and from Dublin, as it happens. You are quite the champ. I will put a timer on so I know we don't take up too much of your precious time, so that you can get some good shut eye. Yeah, I guess I sent you the questions ahead of time. I do have a few questions from our audience that weren't covered by the questions that I sent you. Not many, I think, and I think they might come up in our conversation. But if you could just, to get us started, just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Henry Henry.
Hi. Well, first of all, hi everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to know that you're there on the other side of the screen. Cheers. Um,
Oh, what are you drinking?
this is whiskey and ginger. Just a nice little kind of, approaching bedtime drink. So Henry Henry really came out of a few different things converging. I mean, when I was in undergrad, I got really interested in the Henriade as plays. I was in New York at the time, and the Royal Shakespeare Company was doing the whole cycle of the Henriade, and I went and saw that several times and really enjoyed it. And as I moved into graduate school, I got more interested in the medieval history, um, and focused more on kind of the immediate medieval context rather than the Shakespearean interpretation. And um, towards the end of grad school, or towards the end of my MA, I was considering whether or not to go on and do a PhD, and I thought, no, like I want to write fiction instead. That I felt like I could do much more with these ideas and these interests as fiction, than as a dissertation, um, because I could sort of, you know, let myself do what I wanted, and not worry too much about kind of scholarly rigor. Um, so in Henry Henry, I did kind of meld. I mean, it's to an extent a reimagining of Shakespeare's Henriade, but it also very much has some of the history that didn't make it into Shakespeare's interpretation as well.
Sorry, trying to keep the background noise off of the stream, so keep showing off the mic. That's really interesting. That's not. I guess that kind of touches on a little bit of a later question. What are things that you found in historical research that you brought into this that Shakespeare didn't? What did you do to Shakespeare? That's wild.
Um, I would say that the thing that came through most intensely in studying medieval history was religion, Catholicism as the state religion of England. It was long before the Reformation, and uh, Richard II and Henry IV and Henry V all would have been Catholic as a matter of course. And by Shakespeare's time, this was obviously a much more fraught and controversial topic that he couldn't necessarily address very directly. I mean, there's a lot about God, but not so much about the degree to which religious ritual was really intertwined into these people's day-to-day lives. And Henry IV and Henry V particularly, I think, were especially well, and Richard II too in a different way. They all were especially religious, not just as a formality because it was what was done at the time, but they really believed that they had this particular relationship with God. In Richard II's case, he really believes that he was God's special favorite little boy. And Henry IV really thought that he was kind of being punished by God for usurping the throne. And Henry V really believed that God was supporting him in his invasion of France. And so I really wanted to bring that into Henry, and make the characters Catholics, in a context in which it would be very unusual. They're specifically recusant English Catholics, so they're this very tiny minority. That is sort of something I wanted to bring from the history.
That's really interesting, and especially the idea that this is gonna just like I'm gonna go ahead and judge myself. When I was at one point in time watching The Crown, I was very surprised by Elizabeth's genuine belief that she was a vessel for God, because that's not a perspective we hear in contemporary times very often. That a figurehead is like very much truly believes that they are a vessel for God. And so to see that in Hal and his family in this contemporary setting was really interesting. And so it's so thank you for illuminating that, because it definitely comes through, and it gives them kind of like a peculiar shine that is really nice, actually, because it's just so curious and so special. To the questions that I sent you ahead of time, which touches on what you've been talking about, why Henry V specifically for Hal?
Honestly, these were just the plays that I happened to be interested in. It was really the plays that chose me. I didn't sort of go, well, I want to do a Shakespeare retelling. Which Shakespeare play will I choose? The novel really came. It sort of was like, I am really interested in the Henriade and really interested in this period of late medieval English history. And I feel compelled to write a novel about it.
Gotcha. I wasn't sure if like at one point Hal could have been Richard or something. The second question, which is very much something that we talked about before this conversation, before we had you join. So I definitely want to make sure we get to talk about this. So the idea that there is so much trauma within this book, but it is still so funny and so beautifully written. Can you just talk a little bit about that, like true juxtaposition, that intense tightrope, what that was like to write? Was that the intent? This is kind of grouping together a few of the questions that I sent you, but that's, I think, inquiring minds definitely want to know about that evolution.
Yeah, the humor was always, I mean, I didn't set out to go, okay, well, I'm going to write jokes in this book. But it really is kind of crucial to Prince Hal's character in Shakespeare. And this is sort of a Shakespearean invention, that the real Henry V was very serious. And it kind of, in that respect, bears little resemblance to Shakespeare's Prince Hal. And so the humor really came from Shakespeare, because Shakespeare himself is a writer who can't stop doing wordplay. And kind of getting in like the comedy characters and the jokes and the play within a play. And I ended up finding it a very fruitful mode of writing about abuse and trauma, because I think the truth of these situations often is that there are these unexpected moments of humor. People can't stop themselves from making jokes. And this sort of compulsion of Prince Hal's to keep making jokes, well, usually at others' expense, sometimes at his own. is something that I felt was enjoyably provocative, I think, and made me sort of gave me much more freedom with the material than I would have had if I'd gone into it thinking, well, I'm going to take this very, very seriously and write a very, very serious book about very, very serious subjects. I think um, I think it wouldn't have worked, because it is sort of suppressing a natural element of uh, pain.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that that in the original source text, in Shakespeare source text, that Hal is has there's lots of wordplay. Like, of course, we know in Shakespeare there's lots of wordplay, but I think and you know we a few folks here and I talked about this before we started that you know there's most people's exposure to Shakespeare is at best 15 to 20 years old if they're an adult. Like it's in high school and you learn about the histories, you learn about the tragedies, and you learn about the comedies, and never the three shall mix. And so one wouldn't really think of the histories as something that could have humor, but they absolutely do, because as you said, like Shakespeare has this amazing wordplay. So I think that's really that gives me like pause about some things that I think that some people would want to talk about with this, and with the intertwining of humor and trauma and the question of a retelling or an adaptation, because that is so. I think that, you know, you go back and look at that text a little bit more, because it is. It is neither Shakespeare nor your book are as black and white as some high school teachers might want to tell us or our children. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it helps because I didn't have the experience of reading Shakespeare in high school. I went to a very strange kind of very small, kind of wacky, crunchy secondary school where, you know, we were out in the woods a lot. And there wasn't as much of that kind of rote teaching of certain curriculum. And so I, you know, I had been interested in Shakespeare as a very young child. I had these little like picture book retellings of Shakespeare, that I loved. I was obsessed with Hamlet. I went to go see Hamlet at the Globe in the year 2000. And so I think I was able to kind of, as an adult in undergrad and grad school, kind of come back to that original love for Shakespeare without that sort of intervening struggle that a lot of people have with kind of being like, oh, I have to learn this for, you know, whatever high school class.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much the forced recitations in iambic pentameter completely remove meaning from a sentence. I think that I blame a lot of my personal kind of struggle with some of this on that. Okay, so I'm just looking at to see what that very long question I wrote to you that was perhaps therapy for myself, that I want to make sure I don't short shrift, but I think you touched a little bit on it, but in terms of what was the novel that you published, was that always a novel you intended to write?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The long answer is, I mean, obviously no, because at the beginning of writing a novel, there is no novel. And so you only have it at the end. But in terms of kind of the broad strokes, the idea that it would be this reimagining of Shakespeare's Henriette, a bit of the medieval history mixed in, in this context of the contemporary English aristocracy, that all kind of had coalesced into an idea before I actually started writing. And then the writing itself and the editing was very, very long. And it was more kind of the slow chipping away and adding and taking out and reshaping than radically reworking the concept.
Okay, well that's fascinating because it is such a layered, such an intensely layered book. And we've been doing this book club for 1 million years slash eight years. So over 100 books that we've talked about, and I always ask this question because it honestly everyone has a very different answer. And there's a lot of times that books, like there's entire other novels that are left on the cutting room floor that the author themselves will say probably shouldn't see the light of day. But they're so happy with the work that they have at the end, but it wasn't what they intended, and then sometimes completely vice versa, that they started with something, they thought it was going to be something else, and then at the end of it, they just kept coming back to that core idea. So thank you. Thank you for illuminating your process a bit and your intention. But with that, the relationship between Hal and his father, and how that incorporates both the complication of a coming of age story, all of the Catholic guilt, and just true terrible trauma and abuse. If you could talk a little bit about that as a deviation from the idea of this as a retelling or a reimagining, just especially considering how that's very heavily marketed, and as you said, was your original intention to use that as a source material and reimagine it for today. Could you talk about that? Because it's clearly, of course, they're going to have very strong reactions to it, as they should. It's important, heavy material.
Yeah, part of what I wanted to do with the novel, and part of my sort of impetus in writing the novel, is to explore the continuities between these kinds of narratives, and not to see narratives of sexual violence as this sort of independent thing that's in a box, that could never in any way kind of have connections to narratives that don't explicitly condemn sexual violence. And I think, I mean, it's I would say the approach is, I think a lot of other authors have had that kind of approach to queerness, right? That if you're making characters queer, introducing a queer element into a sort of retelling or reimagining, you're not necessarily adding this sort of outside element that could never have been conceived by the original author or has no bearing on the original text. I think for me it was quite natural to see the power struggles in the Henriade as sort of extending into sexual violence, because it is so much about power and control and the lengths to which people will go to exert power over others, and in particular their family. I mean, the Henriade is a family drama. They're all related to each other. When Henry IV usurps Richard II, he's not some kind of people's hero. He's the king's cousin, who was the son of one of the richest men of England. They were all interrelated long before the narrative of the Henriade starts. And so in addition to the sort of strictly political struggles, they have all of this kind of long-standing family beef. And I felt like I could see really easily how, in particular, the relationship between Henry and Hal could sort of be extended into one of sexual violence, because, I mean, in the productions of the Henriade that I've seen, usually it's kind of played off quite I don't want to say straight, but you know what I mean. But in terms of the, Henry the Fourth is this kind of grumpy king who's like, son, you shouldn't be out there drinking and carousing. You should be learning how to live, as a king and rule the country. And sometimes like I'm kind of underwhelmed or frustrated with that because the soil of the relationship between a father and a son is so fertile and so fraught and so painful, and often so violent in in many different ways, that the figure of the father as someone who at all costs will exert control over his family is something that's quite common, and that I think certainly you see. Um, I mean, you can sort of like the common conception is like the king's two bodies, right? That like the king has the body of his own self, and then the body politic, the body of the nation, the body that is the land of his realm. But I do think there's also kind of a paternalistic relationship as well. That The king is sort of the father of the realm, and power only flows one way in that relationship.
That makes so much sense, in terms of the questions that we've had as a group about the book. So thank you for taking the time to explain that to us. And it also it really, I think, reinforces, and another element of it, that the abuse that we see and the power struggles that you're talking about in the historical context also belie like the person in power. Like it can often be that their aggressions are often pinned back to like a fear of their own mortality, and that's something we see so clearly with Hal's father. Like it's not to I mean, it doesn't make him seem more likable. It doesn't, none of that. But it's just like you are just such at your root, at your core, such a weak person, and then just that weak people can still exact so much harm and still hold so much power. And the dichotomy of that, I think you captured that really, really, really well, and especially thinking about it in that historical context. So thank you. Okay, we've got, oh my God, 5 minutes left. I'm so sorry. Okay. Okay, can we talk about something happy, aka?
Yes.
Percy and Hal's relationship. So this quote that I put here was a quote that I found from a reader on Storygraph, and I think really just captured it so well. And so I'll tell it for our three streamers. Hey guys, thanks. What is beautiful about the book, and perhaps more real than the dramatic revenge I craved for this character, is that Hal, in the thick of his pain and reckoning, falls in love. And that is, it's a complicated love, it is messy, but it's so real. So can you talk to us a little bit about writing that, and what that relationship means to you within the context of this book?
Yeah. Well, that was also an element of the book that came very easily because it's so obvious to me in the plays that Hal and his super cool manly rival Hotspur, want to fuck. And so I was like, there's no question for me about it. Like, I'm going to kind of bang them together. But I mean, I find it interesting. I find the relationship with Percy interesting as a means to kind of mirror Henry and Hal's relationship, because Percy is, I mean, he's sort of, I mean, it is in the plays, there Henry the Fourth has this long speech that's kind of like, I really wish that Harry Percy was my son instead of you. And I carry a little bit of that into the narrative that Percy is excelling in his own line. And as much as Hal wants to kind of make fun of him for it, he's really seething inwardly, because he himself has not really brought anything of his own desires and interests into fruition. And so he has this total resentment that leads so easily into sexual attraction. And the sexual attraction really comes first. And it's kind of like, Percy's kind of bi-curious. He's like, well, you're gay. And it kind of goes from there. And it's really, I mean, like, whether or not there is love, I mean, whether Hal is capable of love, I mean, I think is a matter for debate, and one that I did kind of want to leave ambiguous to some extent. Like, it was never going to be kind of, I mean, like in the plays, Hotspur dies, like Hal kills him. And so to some extent, I give them a happier ending. But there is this kind of troublesome sameness about them, that I mean, Percy says it towards the end of the book that he thinks that like shouldn't go with like, that they're too similar to have a good relationship. And I think that's true to some extent, that they're similar enough that they can see their own flaws in each other. And I mean, I find that more fun to write, honestly, and more interesting than sort of like, well, and then they were beautifully in love and lived happily ever after.
I mean, I don't think that you could be Hal and have that. That would be super weird, honestly. If we just had this like weird, like if all of that was to give us weird meet cute, and then they go like riding off into the sunset, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like a different book, and they define norms and they become their own lords. That would be great, but I don't find that to be realistic for Hal or for Percy, for that matter. So yeah, but it still is just this wonderful, fun journey, even though it is messy. And I mean, for me, and I think a few other folks at least here, maybe Hal isn't capable of love in the way that many of us have experienced it, in the way that many of us would expect our central characters to experience it. But it feels like he experiences something with Percy that he didn't think he ever would be able to, which is amazing in and of itself. So bravo for that portrayal. Okay, so we are at 8 o'clock. I technically have 2 minutes because we started a little bit late. So can you tell me, rapid fire, what are you working on now, and what have you read recently that you would recommend?
Well, it's great. I won't take up too much time with the first question, because I'm going to stay very tight-lipped about it. I kind of have a superstition that I can't talk too much about projects in their early stages, because then I'll expend all of my energy just kind of talking about it before I actually, sit down and write. So, I'm working on things. You'll see it when you see it. Although I do want to take the time to say that I have, since finishing Henry, published 2 stories on the Granta website. One is from Henry's point of view, called Barbarism, and one is going back to see more of Richard, and that's called Honeymoon. And so if people want to read a little bit more about the Henry universe, it's there, it's online for free. So what I'm reading, actually, I just finished a really very good piece of memoir called Paper Cuts by Stephen Bernard, which sort of intertwines his experiences of the sexual abuse by Catholic priest with his scholarly work in Oxford. He works particularly on 18th century literature in the sort of history of the literary canon, and is also very much interested in Oxford as a place and as an institution. Really well done. And the book I'm reading, I've got about maybe 50 pages more, is Petals of Blood by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, which is it was published in the 70s. It's this tale of the first few decades of Kenya's independence. It had formerly been a British colony, and it's about the sort of in a way that's sort of resonant with the Henrietta, definitely a sort of struggle for power, and the sort of disillusionment that comes with trying to build something new in this sort of post-colonial context, and having it all turn out much more disappointingly than the characters would have ideally liked. So I definitely recommend that. Both of those novels really good.
Excellent. Sorry. Forgot about the mic. There we go. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is extremely enlightening. Everybody give it up for Alan.
Thank you.
And we will be on the lookout for your next forthcoming work that you're going to keep behind closed doors. Normally, we would tell you our casting options for if this were to be turned into a movie or a limited series, but we didn't have a chance to get to that. If we get through it, I will try and send you a list of that after our meeting tonight. But has this been optioned for anything?
No. Well, it's funny. I have. Well, the tea is that there are people. I have a film and TV agent who has shopped it around, and the response has been like, well, this is really great, this is interesting, but like nobody's ever going to do the incest. Like it's just not going to happen. So it may be one can only hope, because why not after everything else that's been on TV. But
you make a compelling point. You do make a compelling point. I mean, I would watch it. I read it. I loved it. Many of us did. So I think it would make excellent, compelling television. And we're going to try and cast it. So we'll send our options to you when we're done here. Thank you again for joining us. Go to bed or go do whatever you were going to do at whatever ungodly hour it is over there in Dublin. And have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really am so glad to have had a chance to be a part of this. This is great.
Thank you. Wonderful. It's very easy to just exit out. All you have to do is close your tab.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.